I remember the grease under my fingernails better than I remember the faces of the women I loved. There is a specific honesty to old grease, a mixture of heavy oil and fine metal filings that settles into the whorls of a man's skin and refuses to be scrubbed away. In Chelyabinsk, before the world caught fire, the workshop was a cathedral of silence and purpose. I was 22, but my hands were older. They knew the language of torque and tolerance. If a piston failed, it was because of physics, heat, friction, poor casting. There was no malice in a broken connecting rod, only a problem to be solved with a wrench and patience. I can still close my eyes and feel the warmth of that workshop, the smell of heated iron and sawdust, the way the light fell through the high windows in dusty, golden columns. It was a world where things made sense. If you listened to the machine, it told you what it needed. But memory is a liar. It smooths the edges. It tells me that the workshop was warm. But perhaps I only remember it that way because of the cold that came later. The cold of the Voronezh front was a living thing, a hungry animal that gnawed through fur-lined boots and leather flight jackets. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the dampness of the steppe, a wet, heavy chill that rusted the soul as quickly as it rusted the exhaust manifolds. We were parked in the mud, a row of Yak-1 fighters looking less like birds of prey and more like farm equipment abandoned in a storm. The airfield was a scar on the earth, churned into a slurry of black soil and high-octane fuel. My hands, the same hands that had coaxed tractors back to life in Chelyabinsk, were now shaking. Not from the cold, though God knows it was freezing, but from the doubt. I ran my palm over the cowling of White 12. She was a good plane, sturdy, but she was built by starving women and children in factories that had no roofs. Every rivet, every weld was a question mark. I wasn't a pilot then. I mean, I wore the uniform, I had the wings, but in my heart, I was still the mechanic, terrified that I had missed something. I spent my downtime not playing cards or boasting about kills I hadn't made, but walking around the aircraft, touching the control surfaces, listening to the wind whistle through the oil cooler. My comrades called it dedication. I knew it was fear. I was terrified that a speck of dust in a fuel line would be the reason a friend didn't come home. It wouldn't be the Germans who killed him. It would be me, Vasily Stepanovich, because I was too tired to check the filter one last time. The morning of the scramble, the fog was lifting, revealing a sky the color of a bruised plum. I was performing the pre-flight check, my ear pressed against the fuselage as the ground crew hand-cranked the inertia starter. I heard it then, a tick. It was faint, buried under the groan of the gears. I froze, my breath plumed before me, vanishing into the gray air. Was it a valve tappet, a loose spark plug wire arcing against the block, or was it just the metal contracting in the morning chill, the aircraft shivering just like I was? My mind raced through the schematic of the Klimov engine, visualizing the camshafts, the bearings, the delicate dance of steel on steel. Logic dictated I strip the engine. Logic dictated I ground the plane. Then the siren cut through the air. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was a sound you felt in your teeth. A rising, mournful wail that shattered the morning routine. Men dropped cigarettes, spilled tin cups of tea, and scrambled through the sucking mud. The loudspeaker crackled, distorted and urgent. I looked at the engine cowling. The ticking was gone, swallowed by the shouting of mechanics and the roar of other engines coughing to life nearby. I had a choice. I could trust my ear, the ear of a mechanic who knew that a tick was never just a tick, or I could trust the war. Vasily, move, my wingman was waving at me from the next revetment. He was a boy barely 18, with peach fuzz on his cheeks and eyes that were too wide, too bright. I think his name was Misha, or maybe Sasha. It's terrible, but the names fade before the sounds do. I can recall the pitch of his engine perfectly, but his face is a blur of pale skin and leather helmet. He gave me a thumbs up, a gesture of bravado that looked ridiculous in mittens. I climbed onto the wing, the mud slick under my boots. I slid into the cockpit, the smell of leather, sweat, and gasoline wrapping around me like a shroud. I strapped in, my fingers fumbling with the buckles. I looked at the instrument panel. Oil pressure 0, temperature 0. I primed the engine. I signaled the ground crew. The prop turned sluggish and heavy. I whispered. I pushed the ignition. The engine coughed, a violent hacking spasm that shook the entire airframe. Then it caught. A roar erupted, spitting blue smoke from the exhaust stacks. I adjusted the mixture, watching the needles dance. But as the RPM stabilized, I heard it again. A subtle, harmonic dissonance in the roar. A roughness in the vibration that traveled up through the stick and into my palm. It wasn't right. It sounded tired, but the regiment was moving. The first pair was already lifting off, spraying mud as they clawed for altitude. Misha was rolling. I released the brakes. The yak lurched forward, skidding slightly before the rudder bit the air. I pushed the throttle forward, and the doubt was drowned out by the sheer violence of the acceleration. I was committed. The earth fell away, and with it, the logic of the workshop. We climbed into a blind world. The clouds were a low ceiling of dirty cotton, and we punched through them into a blinding, sun-drenched expanse that felt completely disconnected from the muddy hell we had just left. Up here, the war wasn't about mud and frozen toes. It was about geometry and physics. I focused on the engine, my mentor, my tormentor. I flew with my head cocked to the side, filtering out the wind noise, the static in the headset, focusing entirely on the heartbeat of the V12 in front of me. It was running hot. The oil temperature gauge was creeping past the green arc. I nudged the radiator flap open, murmuring to the machine, coaxing it, apologizing to it. The formation tightened. We were specks of dust suspended in a vast, blue void. I watched Misha's plane bobbing off my right wing. He was flying too close, his movements jerky, nervous. I wanted to radio him, to tell him to relax his grip on the stick, but the radio channels were already a cacophony of static and panicked voices. Bandits. High 4 o'clock. The scream in my headset made me flinch. I looked up, squinting against the glare of the sun. They were there. Small black crosses against the blue. Messerschmitt. And above them the square-tipped silhouettes of Focke-Wulfs, waiting like vultures. The formation broke. It wasn't a graceful maneuver. It was an explosion of panic. The sky suddenly filled with tracers, lines of smoke that looked like scratches on a film negative. The orderly world of formation flying dissolved into a brawl. I banked hard left, the G-force pushing me down into my seat, graying my vision. My engine groaned in protest, the RPM spiking as the propeller bit into the thin air. I saw a yak ahead of me, I didn't know whose, disintegrate. There was no sound, just a silent blossom of orange fire and black debris, and then it was gone, erasing a man and a machine in a heartbeat. Vasily. 6 o'clock, help, it was the boy. I wrenched my neck around. An FW-190 had slotted in behind Misha, its nose lighting up with muzzle flashes. The German pilot was good. He was walking the rudder, spraying cannon shells in a deadly cone. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I slammed the throttle to the stop, pushing the lever through the wire gate that marked the emergency power setting. The war emergency power. The engine screamed. It was a mechanical shriek of agony, the sound of pistons moving faster than they were ever designed to move. The vibration in the stick became a jackhammer. I rolled inverted and pulled, diving across the German's path. I led him guessing, hoping. I pressed the trigger. The yak shuddered as my own cannon fired, the recoil slowing me down like a physical blow. I missed the cockpit, but I saw pieces of the Focke-Wulf's tail shear off. The German broke right, diving away to save his own skin. Misha was clear. I leveled out, gasping for air, sweat stinging my eyes. I had done it. I had saved him. Then the aircraft shook. Not a vibration, but a violent, convulsive shudder that rattled my teeth. A thick, dark trail of smoke whipped past the canopy. I checked the gauges. Oil pressure was plummeting. The temperature needle was buried in the red. I had pushed the machine past its limit, and now it was dying. I had traded the engine for the boy. The radio was a wash of screams, but in my cockpit, the sound of the engine changed. The roar became a clatter, a bag of hammers thrown down a staircase. I pulled back on the throttle, trying to nurse it, trying to find a rhythm that wouldn't tear the block apart. I looked around, trying to orient myself. The chaos of the dogfight had drifted south. I was alone, trailing smoke, a wounded duck in a sky full of hawks. Then the world exploded. I didn't hear the shot. I only felt the impact. A 20-cannon shell from an unseen hunter ripped through the engine cowling. The violent shudder became a final, grinding seizure. It sounded like the earth splitting open. Hot oil sprayed over the windscreen, instantly turning the world opaque and brown. I was blind. Then silence. The propeller stopped dead. The roar, the clatter, the wind, everything vanished. The silence was absolute, heavier than the noise had ever been. It was the silence of a grave. My stomach rose into my throat as the lift evaporated. The nose dropped. I couldn't see the horizon. I couldn't see the enemy. I could only feel the sickening lurch of gravity taking hold, pulling me and my broken machine down, tumbling into the void. The void didn't last. The ground rose up to meet me with the force of a hammer strike. Metal screamed against wood. Branches whipped the fuselage like angry lashes. Then the violence stopped. My head slammed against the gun sight. Darkness took me, not from death but from the sheer concussion of the world ending. I woke to the smell of gasoline and wet earth. My left arm hung useless at my side, throbbing with a dull, distant rhythm. I pushed the canopy open with my shoulder and fell out onto the grass. The silence had returned, but now it was textured. Wind in the birch trees, the cooling tick of the engine block, and then voices, harsh, guttural sounds, German. They were close, maybe a kilometer, maybe less. I looked at my yak. She was a ruin. The cowling was torn open, revealing the engine like a wound. The propeller was bent. One blade dug deep into the soil. A pilot would have run. A pilot would have taken his service pistol and vanished into the forest, leaving the wreck for the scavengers. But I was not just a pilot. I was a boy from Chelyabinsk. I was a mechanic. I looked at that engine and I did not see a dead thing. I saw a problem to be solved. I crawled to the nose. The oil pump was shattered. The fuel line was severed, weeping high-octane petrol onto the grass. I had no spare parts. I had a wrench, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers in my flight suit. I needed rubber. I needed wire. Through the trays, I saw the silhouette of a road. A burnt-out hulk of a Kubelwagen sat in the ditch, a casualty of yesterday's retreat. I moved like a thief. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. I reached the German car and sliced a length of hose from its engine bay. I stripped wire from its dashboard. Back at the yak, the sun was sinking. The light was failing. My hands shook, slick with oil and my own blood. I bypassed the pump. I bridged the magneto connections with the stolen wire. It was ugly. It was a scar made of copper and rubber. But I knew the clearances. I knew the tolerances. I could feel the machine wanting to breathe. The voices grew louder. Boots crunched on dry leaves. They were sweeping the woods. They had found the trail of smoke. I climbed into the cockpit. The leather seat was cold. I checked the fuel pressure. It was barely registering. The patch job was a prayer held together by friction and hope. The footsteps stopped. A shout right outside the tree line. They had seen the tail. I had one chance. If she didn't catch on the first turn, the starter motor would give me away, and they would fill the cockpit with lead before I could draw a breath. I closed my eyes. I didn't pray to God. I prayed to the piston rings. I prayed to the spark. I pressed the starter. The propeller jerked. The engine coughed, spat blue smoke, and then caught. The roar was deafening, a sudden, violent resurrection that shattered the evening calm. It wasn't a smooth purr. It was a snarl. I slammed the throttle forward. The yak lurched out of the trees, bouncing over the uneven ground. Leaves and dirt blasted backward. I saw muzzle flashes from the tree line. Tracers zipped past my canopy, angry hornet stings of light. One punched through the tail, but I was already moving. I pulled back on the stick. She didn't want to fly. She was heavy, wounded, blighting oil. But she was mine. We cleared the treetops by inches. The landing gear clipped a branch, but we kept climbing. I stayed low, hugging the contours of the land, a dark shape moving against the darkening sky. I flew by the stars and the smell of the exhaust. The engine temperature gauge was broken, the needle dead. But I didn't need it. I listened to the vibration. I felt the heat through the floorboards. I nursed her. I whispered to her. We were two broken things holding each other up. When the airfield lights appeared in the distance, I thought I was hallucinating. I put her down on the dirt strip, bouncing hard, the suspension groaning. The engine died the moment the wheels stopped rolling. It gave up the ghost, its job done. I sat there in the dark, the ticking metal the only sound in the world. Men came running. They pulled me out. They cheered. They slapped my back. They called me a hero. They looked at the engine, at the German hose and the twisted wire, and they shook their heads in disbelief. But I didn't feel like a hero. Decades have passed since that night. The factories in Chelyabinsk have changed. The Soviet Union is gone. I am an old man now, sitting in a workshop that smells of grease and dust. My hands are spotted with age, the knuckles swollen. People ask me about the war. They ask about the kills. They ask about the medals. I don't tell them about the glory. I tell them about the noise. To this day, if a car backfires or if a pot falls in the kitchen, I don't jump. I freeze. I am back in that cockpit, my hand hovering over the ignition, waiting for the bullet that never came. War is chaos. It is designed to break things. Machines, bodies, spirit. It takes the intricate clockwork of a life and smashes it against a wall. But they forget. A mechanic knows how to put things back together. When you are surrounded by the wreckage of your life, when the oil is leaking and the enemy is at the gate, you do not run. You find your tools. You get to work. That is how you win. But the machine is never quite the same, is it? The engine runs, but there is always a rattle deep inside, a loose bearing that reminds you of the day you fell from the sky. The harvest is ruined, the gears are stripped, and no amount of polish can hide the cracks in the casting. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.